I looked at my life, and I guess influenced by martial arts and the role models that I'd had, and thought, it's got to be purposeful. Everything, if I'm doing something that's not purposeful and not adding value to the world, then I'm wasting my time. And I've only got a short, all have this short life. And so I will not waste one more minute.
Welcome back, or welcome to another episode of the Success Times Happiness podcast. I'm your host, Richard Thompson. Today, we have David Dangerfield on the show. A name probably not synonymous to the household, but David has an amazing story. He's the CEO of Compass, a very well-known charity here on the Sunshine Coast that helps people with intellectual and physical disabilities and brings out their most potential to become an asset to society and not a liability. But David's charity is only a small element of his life and what he stands for. And we get into this conversation, and I really hope you enjoy it. So here's David. David Dangerfield, thank you so much for coming in and being part of the podcast.
My pleasure.
You are the founder and head of Compass, award-winning charity here on the Sunshine Coast. In your words, as the founder, what is it today?
Today, it would be best described as a social enterprise. So by that I mean something, a for-purpose organisation that, with minus the commercial imperative, and it has provides support to young people with intellectual and physical disabilities, post-secondary school mostly, although nowadays also having an outreach to students who might be attending special schools or special ed units. We now have 5 sites from Caboolture through to Gympie, the learning and development hubs, and a number of micro-enterprises that include things like Compass Farm, 4 cafes, a retail outlet, a commercial kitchen, a couple of woodwork centres, a pottery, and lawn and garden business, all sorts of things. I lose track.
And the drive for you presently with, I guess, empowering those individuals with disability, how would you describe that?
Australia doesn't do this very well. So a long time ago, I studied overseas and worked in this field. And when I came back to Australia, I saw that we still had what's largely a babysitting service that frees up families, and that's a good thing. But it didn't explore the potential of these human beings, and it relegated them to a kind of minor role in life. What I'd been exposed to was a pathway that we take for granted, which is one of further education, skills-based training, and then vocational opportunity. So I wanted to bring that to the Australian landscape and let people see that when you invest in people with intellectual impairment in particular, by providing that pathway, that they'll move along it at their own pace. And of course, the people that we support at Compass, some of those people, their journey is not as far-reaching as that of others. It depends. They may have much higher needs around health, well-being, therapy, etc. For the vast majority, however, they have opportunities to explore a much richer future. And so they just tread that path like you and I and everybody else did. In Australia, there was a demarcation, and it still largely exists, between education and disability. So there was a line in the sand. You've had your education, and I've had people in the disability world, tasked with representing them in the form of government reps, etc. Tell me that you've had your education, and I dispute that education should finish there. That learning and development, growth, personal growth should finish at that point, and that we shouldn't be funding that. It can't be accidental, though. Learning needs to be structured, and so we try to provide that structured pathway so that it identifies people's capacities and their passions, interests, and it explores those things in ways that engage a person whose intellectual capacity may not be the same as yours and mine, but it still excites them and makes them want to dig deeper into how to have that knowledge and what to do with that knowledge. So, as I said, Australia has not done that particularly well, and we still don't do it very well at all. And so I wanted to bring that pathway to people and then use it as a model to demonstrate that when you engage people with intellectual impairment on that pathway, that they become contributors to society. When you have a scheme like the NDIS, so the National Disability Insurance Scheme, it's an insurance scheme, and B, it came from Productivity Commission, so you've got kind of the wrong birth happening there largely. Something good came out of it for all the wrong reasons. So economic participation is one of the things that the scheme talks about a great deal, and there are markers for that. And I don't object to that being a marker, but it's far from the only marker of a rich life, as you and I both know. And it can be disguised as well. What does economic participation mean? So I think there are other markers that are equally or even more important that help determine what a rich, purposeful life looks like. And so I encourage through Compass for us to explore that as well. The upshot of that is that it gives an opportunity for community, for society to recognise, to sit back and go, hey, hang on a minute. There's an enormous value in the way that these people approach their life. I think one of the things that I saw and heard most through that whole COVID thing was, human connection's really important. Being around good people, being kind to each other, and being around good people has real value. And what I would say is that people with an intellectual disability, largely speaking, have that capacity inherently. So they have all those attributes that we come to admire. They're kind. They're not judgmental. They're present.
They're present, yeah.
When you're talking with them. They are authentic, and they're not going to hold back in what they say or think, but they're going to be gentle, and they're going to love you from the beginning, and they're going to care how you feel all the time.
Where's society falling down when those people have the traits that able-bodied society members desire, yet there is some stigmatism to how much someone with a disability can actually input back into society? Where is the breakdown there, do you think?
It's easy. There is an implicit assumption, an unquestioned, unchallenged assumption that disability equals liability. Liability requires some type of welfare solution, and there's something wrong with those people. We've forever viewed disability under a medical model, and it's only much more recently that we're going, hang on, intellectual disability is not a medical issue, it's something else. And as we put aside that whole medical model, then we can challenge that implicit assumption. We can go, well, hang on, what if they weren't a liability? And that's the question from which I started, was what if they weren't a liability? What if we could view them as a human being, and like any human being, an asset? So a diamond in the rough, perhaps, as you know, we all are in some way.
Yeah, sure.
And so what would it take to help unlock the asset? And that's really simple. That's such a simple formula, because it is further education, skills-based training, vocational opportunities, inclusion, valuing those people, looking at them as an asset and valuing the things, hey, hang on, I really enjoy being around them. Hey, hang on, I smile a lot when I'm with people, these guys, and I get perspective on my life when I'm with them. I can see I should feel grateful for all the things I've got. They're grateful. Then, it's not only intellectual disabilities. I've had a lot to do with people with physical disabilities, young people who've been in my world. I'm thinking of a 13 or 14-year-old man way back who'd had 20-odd operations. He had a shunt in his head. He had spina bifida, so his legs were underdeveloped. He was in a wheelchair. And his mum rang me out of the blue, this is 25 years ago, and said, I've got a son with spina bifida. He's in a wheelchair. He'd like to learn martial arts. Would you accept him? And I said, of course. Bring him to the dojo. Let's see. And she burst into tears and said, are you okay? And she said, well, I can't tell you how many people I've phoned and tried to get my son involved in martial arts, and they all tell me no. So, of course, he came down. He trained with me for some years. I introduced him to his heroes, Paralympic athletes. He took up wheelchair basketball. That's another thing. But it's not only in those people with intellectual impairment, it's people with physical disabilities who automatically start with all these challenges and then climb straight over the top of them. And I admire those people so very much, I'm digressing here a little bit, but the other day I was out at Compass Farm. We were showing had about 100 people out there for a kind of a team building-y day. And there was a gentleman there, an older gentleman named Cecil. And Cecil, I introduced to these guys as my hero. I said, this is my hero, Cecil. I just adore him. Cecil wears a teddy bear on a strap around his neck and secured around his belt. And he has that teddy bear wherever he goes. So when he gets up and dresses, he puts that teddy bear on. And I said, when I grow up, I want to be as authentic and fearless as Cecil. I want to be able to strap a teddy bear on my chest and just go out and do my day.
Yeah.
It's so good. I love it.
We have a mutual friend and that's Pep, and he said, you've got to go out to Compass Farm and speak to David. And I knew of Compass and the work you guys have done in the Sunshine Coast. And so I went out there. Fortunately, it's only down the road, so about 15 minutes away. But drove down there, and it was all very, very impressive. And that's only one campus that you guys have. And then we got to talking. We got talking, and it became very obvious very quickly that Compass is only a small bit of what makes you. Everything underpinning everything that I could see from our discussion was that you're driven to find potential in everybody. And the way that and that's a very common place for me as well. And to help others find their potential. And for me, this is the bar. And we talked about this, that this is the standard. And I want to get people above that. And certainly for people with intellectual or physical disabilities, they're below the bar. And I guess Compass is driven to get them up to the standard. But what was incredibly impressive for me is when we talked about life generally, is how much underpins your existence through your experiences with martial arts. Something as enormous and as impactful as Compass, as a charity that you created and run and head, you would be forgiven to think that could be your entire existence. And that's who you are and what you do. But it was so obvious to me that this is only a very small speck of what motivates you. And understanding that you are one of the highest ranking athletes in martial arts that you can be. And it's been obviously such an imperative part of your whole life. I would love you to take me back to when you got into it, why that became such an important part of your life.
As a young man, I played a lot of sport, and primarily team sport was rugby league. And when I was coming to the end of my schooling, I thought, I spoke to my football coach, who was kind of like, God, And I had thought of perhaps considering rugby league as some sort of career. My grandfather had played rugby league and rugby union for Australia way back, and so he was my other hero. And I had a football in my hands when I could stand, and I wanted to. I thought, no, I wonder. And he said, "There's no career in that. That's not a career." And so I spoke to my coach, and he said, "Well, maybe you should do martial arts." And to this day, I have no idea why he said that or what he knew about martial arts. It was, just an extraordinary thing in Australia in those days. There was a bit of karate and there was a bit of judo, and probably that was about it. But, your football coach says, while you're finishing school. So I went home, got the phone book out and looked up martial arts, and there was a school not that far away. So I went, and it taught a combination of karate and jiu-jitsu. And so I went, and it was ridiculously repetitive and boring, and I would look across the room and there would be people doing all these wonderful things, but I was made to walk up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down, doing all these very basic things. And then it was, now you're going to learn to fall, and so you're going to throw yourself every which way, and here are mats, and here's a vaulting horse, and here's a spring, and so now you're going to do this. And so I did that while gazing over at all these people who were doing interesting things. And eventually, maybe about 6 months in, I got invited over to the other side and started
doing the
learning
interesting
something.
things.
Yeah, learning something. But I was with that gentleman for about 3 years, and he would sit and whole court at the end of the evening. And one night he said, I just do that to get rid of the people I don't want to teach. So that whole process of all those months, and I was like, bastard. In my head, obviously, not out loud. Yeah. But anyway, I really enjoyed it. And there's something, I'm not going to say there was any deep philosophy in those days. I was a young guy. I just wanted to kick ass. I wanted to be fit and physical. And, I was used to contact from a life of rugby league. So I just thought, this is, let's go smash bodies. And so it was no more deep or meaningful than that. Just a really fun physical pursuit that challenged my head, because it was all limits as well. It's like, can you do this? Well, let's see. And will you allow your mind to roll away and get bored, or will you be able to keep focused? And so I guess without any specific kind of direction, if you just given the right framework and the atmosphere, then you just follow it and it leads somewhere. So I went from there to some other. I did a bit of boxing when I was a kid, and so I came across some people who did a thing called Chinese boxing, and so I started doing that for a few years, and I really enjoyed that as well. Basically, it was because one of them handed my ass to me, and I went, okay, there's something about this.
I've got to sort this out.
Yep, got to go check this out. And I got hooked into that for a while, and somewhere in there, in my head, I started to invent a perfect martial art. So I started to see it in terms of principles and combative logic and stuff like this. And so I thought, the perfect martial art is going to have this, and it's going to look like this, and it's going to feel like that. And some, I would have some names for some of those principles, and silly things. I call one principle was the jelly bean principle. You don't want to even know,
right?
But it's just that you're trying to build a framework in your mind. And then I saw a demonstration of something, and I thought it looked fake. To be honest, I just looked and went, really? But it intrigued me, because I saw some of those principles that I'd been inventing in this practice. And then the time came around, I was doing a bit of part-time teaching of the art for fun, and of my previous sort of combat training was I was sharing that. And then I saw that a person was teaching this other art called Aikido in a local hall. And so I went, and it was a female who was not qualified. She was just a student, but she was doing her best, and had this little rented hall, and where there'd been some old guys doing some judo and stuff a couple of nights a week. And I went, and I realised she's not very, particularly skilled or anything like that, but I'm still intrigued by what's happening, so I want to have a look at it. And she left after about a year, and another guy came, and he wasn't very skilled either, but I could see behind them there was some stuff, and so I stuck at it. And then he left, and another guy came, and he wasn't very skilled either. But again, I just kept chasing this thing that, I could see. I was reading about the philosophy of the art. I could see this thing in the background of superb ways of using a body, and of mental focus, and of use of energy, and in efficiency and effectiveness and sophistication, and all of these things that were lurking in the background. And eventually that last person left, and by that time I was the senior person in that group, and the student said, well, he's gone, why don't you teach? And I said, no, I'm not here to teach. I don't want to teach. I want to learn. And they said, well, can't you do something? I said, look, if I can find somebody who inspires me in this art, who I think's actually got it, then I'll stay. I'll learn from them, and I'll keep sharing with you, and we'll work together. And by all those things, that synchronicity, serendipity, whatever you want to call it, of course, I found that person, and he remains one of my best friends, probably my best friend to this day. And so this is 35 years ago, something like that. And I looked into his, of course, he shared his background with me. I learned a great deal from him, and I could see that where he had gone, where he got his stuff. He had studied with his uncle in Malaysia from the time he was a kid. And I met his uncle, and he was extraordinary. But by that time, he's also saying, well, I know you think I'm good, and I know you think he's good, but you got to go to Japan. And so I did. So I went to a place called the Yoshinkan Honbu Dojo in Japan, which is probably the premier martial arts dojo in the world. It was. And I went there at the time of kind of its golden years, when the very best, the master was still alive, the very, very best were there. And what they did that was different was they knew how it worked. And they would show you very precisely your toe this way, not that way, your finger this way, your elbow here, pull this muscle down here. And in enormous detail, mechanical detail, be able to just take me from there to there in very short time, as long as you're willing to do the work.
How long were you in Japan for?
I was on and off in Japan. I couldn't stay because I was working here. So I would go over for weeks, or I think the longest time over there was a couple of months. But I went, I don't know, I stopped counting at about 30 trips.
Wow.
So a lot.
Yeah.
And I wasn't wealthy by any means, and I was eating rice balls and living wherever I could on the floor of people's houses over there. But I made some wonderful friends, some foreign guys and some Japanese guys who looked after me. The teachers were incredible to me, and I affiliated my school with them, and the headmaster licensed me to have that dojo as part of his group. It's like just a big family, It really is like a big family. That the license that I got from him was, we've got to get to know you. That means we're going to beat you up and see how you take that. We're going to go drinking, and we're going to see how you take that, and we're going to train your ass off. And we're just going to see how you take that. And, you took it just fine. Okay, here's the license.
Yeah.
And it's a life license. This will never be rescinded. We get you now. And so that's, I became part of that group, and I was with that group for over 20 years. Wonderful, just wonderful, because they really, really knew. And I started roaming around a little bit inside Japan. I found some other people that I connected with who also had high levels of mastery in that art, but they were approaching it from slightly different directions. And then I had the great good fortune. I was actually in Australia and I was teaching a seminar down in Sydney. And a friend of mine rang me and said, "Oh, when you finish, come up to this place in North Sydney. There's a gentleman here who's headmaster of an old art, a Koryu art, so old school art, teaching Japanese swordsmanship and ancillary weapons and stuff. And he's a freak. You want to see this guy." And by this time, I'd seen pretty much everything.
Everything can be seen.
Yeah. And I went into that hall and I sat down in Japanese style on the wood floor with my student, and I watched this guy, and 20 minutes in I went, who do I have to kill to get close to this man?
Wow.
He was insane, just insane. In his 70s, I've never seen anything like it with a weapon. Moved similarly to the headmaster of the Oshinkan, so I could look at the way he used his body and go, there's some stuff there. His power from this tiny little person was insane. And so I at the end, he saw me sitting there for a long time, Japanese style on wooden floor, which is not comfortable. And he couldn't help but go, hang on, you must be, nobody sits like that for that.
That's legs under, calves under the thighs.
Yeah. So my friend got the teacher at that place to bring him over to meet me, or for me to meet him. And, I introduced myself and spoke a little Japanese, and he's like, oh, yeah, what do you do? And my friend said, he's an Aikido teacher. He's got a school in Queensland. And he said, what is it? I said, it's a full-time school, Yoshinkan Hombu. He said, okay, yeah, I've heard of Shoto Sensei. And he said, do you know a man named, the equivalent of Mr. Smith? Do you know a man named Mr. Smith in Queensland? Of course I did.
Right.
And so I was able to say, yes, I do. He said, he's probably not told you, but he's one of my live-in students many years ago. So seeing as you know him, why don't you come and train with me? And so next trip to Japan, I went and started studying with him and stayed with him until he passed.
Yeah, right.
And so I've just had this extraordinary good fortune.
When you went over that time and studied with him, was that solely on the swordmanship auxiliary weapons?
I train sort of 5 to 8 hours during the day at the Oshinkan Hombu, and then go across town to see him, and we'd train for a few hours in the evening, and that became my daily pattern. So 11 and 12-hour day was normal. Where
does that drive come from? Because it's not like you're spending 12 hours climbing working at a corporation, climbing the ladder because you want something, golden handcuffs or material wealth. It's what's driving you for that so many years of perfecting a particular art. Where is the motivation coming from?
I get to know myself. I get to understand myself and my capacities and my
in your
potential.
20s. That's an evident. That's not reflection, right? That's not you saying at this stage of your life you can reflect and go, "That's what I was doing." But was it an actual present feeling that's what you were doing?
Yeah, totally. I look at. I make this joke these days that people ask me about compass, and I go, "Yeah, that's my hobby." Your hobby? What's your profession? I say, I'm a martial artist. And that's actually probably closest to the truth. My profession, what I believe I'm best at is as a martial artist and martial arts athlete, martial arts teacher, because I've been trained professionally to be a professional. Compass is an offshoot of that, and I love it to death. It's completely founded on the principles of martial arts. So, but it's just you can't see them because people don't understand what's underneath. But that's what drives it. All the kind of rules, philosophy about compass stems from that.
So talk to me about what are the principles? What are the things and I can imagine this is a how long is a piece of string sort of question, but what are the principles you take out of a life in martial arts that the general population, the general person hasn't experienced?
One of my Shoda sensei used to talk about mindful mindlessness, mindless mindfulness. And what that references is a paradox. And so what I observe is that one of the greatest things at play in this world is a paradox. And I'm interested by paradox. In fact, that's probably the only thing that really interests me is any time I see a paradox and I want to open that box, because all the good things are in that space. And
the conflicting nature.
Yes. Yeah. Well, what appears to be conflicting nature.
Okay.
It's like a thing that's like a circle. And so you go far enough around in this direction, and far enough in this direction, what seems to be, instead of polar opposites, if you turn that line into a circle, and these 2 points are right next to each other. So what look like the either end. So even that kind of polar opposite thing disappears because it's the view I have of it is like this rather than like this. So, and that's one of the principles you might say is how to look at things. And so, looking at things and observing the universe at play through a different set of eyes, having my eyes honed to see differently, to look for different things, and then what we look for we see. So perspective, instinct. So it's, the world that I train in is things happen too fast to use your mind to calculate anything. It forces me to become absolutely an instinctive being, and to hone and then trust those instincts so that there's not a hair between the observation and the action that flow out of that. So this is another principle, is take away the gaps, create flow, and flow is incredibly important. It's everything. So I want my day to flow. I want my life to flow. I work on the principle of anything that looks like it's going to be an obstacle to that flow, then I have to remove that thing. And often those things aren't external, often those things are internal. So I'm working internally to take out anything that feels clunky and be left with just, there's a Japanese landscaping principle, and it says you don't put things into a landscape to achieve perfection. You take all the unnecessary pieces out until what you're left with is just the zen. It's just the thing, the moment, the essence, the essence.
And I guess that's where a lot of that connection with the hero nature of the intellectual and physical people that you deal with, that they've got probably more flow.
100%.
They're in more flow state than
100%.
any of us. They're present. They're so grateful and be so happy to be here. Everything in their landscape that could just detract probably wasn't there in the first place, but is not there to be. There's nothing to be removed.
Yeah, which is why I enjoy their company so much, and why I'm attracted to helping them in any way that I can, and because I get as much from every interaction as they do. It reinforces to me the nature of flow in that space, in that part of human interaction.
And the genesis of Compass, though, wasn't there, was it? It didn't start with helping the disabled and finding that they are, in fact, diamonds in the rough. It started at schools.
Yes, that's right. So when I made this brilliant financial decision, that I don't talk about this a lot, but I can tell you that I arrived at a point in my life where I'd been doing things. I'd been practicing martial arts. I had a reasonably successful life, in terms of, a couple of little business, a bit of some money in the bank and stuff like that. And I looked at my life, and I guess influenced by martial arts and the role models that I'd had, and thought, it's got to be purposeful. everything. If I'm doing something that's not purposeful and not adding value to the world, then I'm wasting my time. And I've only got we all have this short life. And so I will not waste one more minute. So I will only get out of bed in the morning if it's purposeful. And so as a result, I didn't accept any work. Work was being offered to me and I turned it down, and because it didn't light my fire. And so my money was running out and running out and running out. And, I didn't start with a lot, but it was going fast. And I was literally arriving at a point where a friend said to me, well, you can always, I see we know you're a bit stuck. You're not going to change, you're not going to give in. So maybe you should take some unemployment benefits. I'm like, no, it's not how I play. So I literally went out onto the veranda of the house that I lived at the time and eyeballed the universe and I said, hey, I want to do something. I want to only do things that add value and are purposeful. But you better pull your finger out and get behind me because I'm going to be sleeping in the gutter in a week's time. And so stop effing around and get on my team. And
this is the conversation with the universe.
Yeah.
And you were in the time frame was that within a very short period of time.
Yeah.
Something had to happen.
Yeah. And I don't believe in God. I don't have a religious bone in my body. I'm probably anti-religious, if anything. But I probably, for want of a better word, I'd be described as a spiritual person, and I'm very open to that world. So I wasn't having a chat with God, and I wasn't waiting for God to save me. I believe that there's a mind. The universe, I observe that there is a mind, and that the universe wants to unfold in optimum ways, and that's where flow lies. Is when we find align our energies with those optimum opportunities for me and the universe get on the same wave. So anyway, quite literally the next morning I received a phone call, and it was remember I'm a struggling martial arts teacher. I've made this brilliant financial decision I will teach martial arts full time. Genius. I've got like 3 students coming in, and the phone rang, and it was an offer to teach a program at a local TAFE college for long-term unemployed youth. So these were 19 to 25-year-old people who had been unsocialised and, had various backgrounds around, alcohol and drug and crime and so on. But they were looking to be picked up to reintegrate with further education and employment opportunities and so on. And so I was one of 5 people who the TAFE contracted to provide these bridging courses over 8 weeks to them as part of kind of getting them across into the next part of the program. So after the first 8-week program, they dismissed the other 4 and kept me, and mainly because the people, I had made no bones of what I did during my day. So I said, let's go, jump in the bus, let's go out to the dojo, you can see what I do. And so they weren't going to mess with me, but they did mess with the others. And so there was, anyway, I inherited that program, so I'm doing that work for probably, 3 years. I really liked it. And that was supplementing my income. The handful of bucks that I was picking up from teaching martial arts, and it was all about my own practice as well, And I just looked at that and went, you know what, this is that absolute ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. These people are 19 to 25, they've gone through all this crap and landed at the bottom of the cliff, and nobody's doing anything about that. So I did some research, I spoke to some friends in education, and we identified that there were a couple of places where you could be impactful in the lives of those people if I met them when they were younger. And so I chose one of those places, which was year 8 and 9, so 13 and 14, and I saw it's primarily boys who are struggling. I'm a boy. I know how that works, and I know what young men want and value. And so I went to 4 local secondary schools and I spoke to them and said, I would like to offer you my services. I would like to run an 8-week program for I'd like you to give me the names of 14 to 16 young men in year 8 and 9 who you're about to expel. And I will take them 3 times a week here at the school and I'm going to teach them martial arts. And at the end of that time, if I have not succeeded in turning them around, then you don't have to pay my bill. So they kind of looked at that and went, hang on, there's no downside here.
Yeah, what is the catch?
So I built out a program, and the program was a whole pile of basic martial arts, Aikido training, not really martial arts, generally specifically Aikido training. And based on the study that I'd done in Japan, so it was hard ass, and take these boys into a cage or an area at the school where we would wrestle up some mats, and there was a heavy life skills thread through it, but it was also, I had a friend of mine from the SAS who came and helped me with a couple of programs, and he's gone, geez, man, I'd rather go train with the SAS than you in these schools. These boys you're killing them.
Yeah.
But you know what? They just grew another leg. Those programs turned into something huge. So there were, across the next 14 years or so, 7,000 young people went through those school programs.
Wow.
They were fee-for-service basis, so, it gave me something to do during the day. Mm-hmm. So my day was I would often teach at the dojo early morning class or do my own training, then go out to schools for 5-6 hours, come back, lay my head down on a gi on the mat, have a 20-minute kip, teach a kids class, teach 2 adult classes, do my own training, go home, repeat.
Wow.
But I loved the work, just loved the work. And many of those young men just came to the dojo when their course finished.
Sure.
And of course it grew from young men to also enrichment programs post those intensive behaviour. I was calling them this is an intensive behaviour modification program. I wasn't putting any bells and whistles on it. We will be changing how you behave.
Yeah. On the principles of Aikido.
Yeah. You're going to change how you behave, and you're going to want to do it for these reasons. And people I'd interview parents, and they'd say, "You're never going to get my son into this program." And I was like, "Oh, why's that?" "Well, he won't do anything like this." And okay. So I would go from there to the interviews, and I would sit down and I'd go, "Do you know who I am?" I go, "Yes, we've heard you've run these programs in schools. You teach martial arts." I go, "You have 5 minutes to impress the shit out of me. Go." And they'd be like, "What do you mean?" I said, "You're wasting time. Tell me why I should take you into my program." And they'd be like, I and away it would go. And of course we'd walk back into the parent meeting later and go, "Well, yep,
part of it.
They're all in." And they'd be like, "What the hell are you saying there?" But that was how it was. Usually I'd have 20 people, so I'd say there are 20 names. I'm going to take 14. I'm going to kick 2 of you out in the first week. So let's roll.
For all of your adult life, you've honed a craft that is, for lack of a better description, sharpening a knife that you can use to kill. But I would suspect the greater strength is to have complete control over that knife. And it's not the beauty of it isn't how sharp your knife is, but it's the amount of control you have over that weapon. How much is that underpinning what you do in the dojo? And how much of that do you think impacted the kids in that program?
I talk about a principle in Japanese. They say Satsu Jinken and Katsu Jinken. So these mean killing sword or life-giving sword. So the sword is the sword, and it is how you use it that's important. How you see it and how you apply it. The same thing it's still the sword. It will never change. Its nature it was born to kill. That's what its purpose always was. But you can use it to give life rather than take life. I would talk to those boys. I would take an old sword that I have. I have a very old sword in my collection, and I would explain how it was made, and they could touch something that is the essence of great craftsmanship. It is a perfect killing implement at the same time as it is a beautiful work of art. Mm-hmm. It sits in both spaces absolutely perfectly at the same time. So it's how you look at it. And I would explain that it would start off as a piece of ore dug out of the ground, and that would go to the swordsmith's forge, and they would undergo a lengthy ritual with the swordsmith and his assistants, of kind of a almost religious type of significance, to prepare themselves to work with this piece of ore and unveil what's inside it. And so they would, in a short version, they would heat and beat that piece of ore into shape over time in a forge. And it was a process of refining and removing the elements that weren't part of the sword. So they'd be cutting it out, they'd be hammering it, belting it, heating it, belting it, heating it, folding it, belting it, until it took the shape of a long piece of metal. And then they would start to polish or fine-tune that thing to determine which side was going to be the blade and which side is the back. Eventually, it would have something that was straight, that looked like a sword, basically. And they would cover it in clay. And then they would take a fine implement and they'd scrape the clay off along the blade side. And in doing so, they would be drawing pictures. There are a whole variety of ways of doing that are in themselves an art. And the weapon would then be heated baked in this clay. And the clay would protect everything apart from the pieces that were exposed where the drawing was along the length of the blade. Mm-hmm. And, if you've seen the movies, it looks like a wave. Mm-hmm. This is just a facsimile of what it can be, and there are a myriad of actual artworks that are drawn along the side of the sword, along the blade. And then they would take the clay off quickly and thrust it into a barrel of water. And if they had done it properly, then the blade would start straight and then it would arc in exactly the place that they chose it to, and to the degree that they chose it to, because the clay was protecting the back of the sword and keeping a different temperature.
Right.
And if it was done properly, then you would be left with something that looked like a sword. They would carve a tang, so the piece where the handle is going to go over the end, and then they would polish this thing. Not sharpen. They never talk about sharpening. They talk about polishing. And this is, again, just a different approach to something I don't know. There are some things you shouldn't even try to explain, but there is a difference in when you polish something as opposed to when you sharpen it. So sharpening people isn't what I do. Polishing people is what I do. Mm-hmm. And so I would say this is just like your training. I'm going to heat you and beat you, and I'm going to fold you up, and then we're going to turn you into we're going to reveal the person inside, the sword inside you, and that will be you. And every one of those is unique, and we will polish you so that you can be truly appreciated as the best person that you can be. You can become your ideal self. You reveal your essence through the process of training. And actually, this is, of course, what traditional martial arts seeks to do, is to reveal the essence of the person, polish it, and then put it in place. So it can sit on a stand and live just like my sword does, or it can be picked up and utilised in if you know what you're doing with that thing. So that's humans, isn't it? And I wouldn't say that looking at it is better than killing with it. They're the same.
And to your point, the use of that is neither good or bad. It just is.
Yeah. If your heart's pure, then you'll kill when that's the right thing to do, and you'll sit back and appreciate when that's the right thing to do.
Why is it, do you think, that you were able to, from a relatively young age, be able to be so introspective enough to see that this is a journey of self-discovery and not be caught up in, I think there's a lot of people that don't really know who they are or don't want to even go down that path. And a lot of people that are on that journey and still don't really know, or it's a lifelong journey of figuring out who they are. Why is it, do you think, you are so willing to understand yourself from a relatively young age?
Using a different muscle. So I think what we tend to do is intellectualize our experiences, try and put them in some sort of framework where there are words. If you open the book that traditional martial arts is written in, you're going to find an empty book, because it's not an intellectual exercise. You can be given mechanics that you work with, so words will be used for some of that, but those words are like keys to unlock a whole room. And in that room is nothing except experience. So you'll now just have experience. My teacher used to say to me that you train and something will arrive whole. You won't think your way to it. You won't approach it in intellectual assumptions or pieces. When you allow yourself to just purely have the experience, then something will arrive, and it will arrive whole. And what you must do then, when that thing arrives, is hold it lightly and don't try and understand it. Don't try and reduce it to a set of thoughts or, intellectualize it. Just let it be. Hold it lightly and let it be, and let it sit into you, and you will become that thing. When you intellectualize it, it'll become an appendage of you. It'll be a skill that sits outside you, and you'll be able to talk about it, but you won't be it. So to be changed by it, to grow, instead of kind of having a person like this, and there's a skill here, and there's a skill here, and there's a skill here, as appended to a person, what happens is the person just grows till they are those things.
Are those things.
And it's a different way of approaching becoming or of integrating information, because it's not really information. And he said the worst thing that I could do as a teacher was to then try and explain it, reduce it, and try and explain it to other people.
On an intellectual level.
Yeah. What I have to do is create an opportunity for people to relive that experience. And let it arrive for them. And then we don't sit and talk about it, because
you just be it.
Yep.
As soon as you talk about it or intellectualize it, you're no longer it.
It's externalized. Yeah. So it's an interesting thing. I have some wonderful students over the years, and colleagues and friends who've been with me for a very long time, and I'd count them now very much as colleagues. We're all students. I just happen to be the steward at the moment, and struggling to do my best. I wish my teacher was still alive, because of course he was vastly better than me, and better at doing that as well. So I've still got a lot of growth to go through, but we try not to intellectualize those things. We try not to have deep, meaningful discussions about it, because it's reducing it to intellectual concepts in some way. So I think what we have in common is we can kind of look at each other and go, waggle of the head, and yep, it's there, it's okay.
Yeah. That's enough. That's enough. Yeah, I really like that. And then, so when did you morph, or when did you start? Where did the calling come with Compass as it is now? When did you see? At what point did you say, that disability sector needs my involvement?
I would love to go, oh my goodness, that was just part of my strategy. That would be absolute rubbish. Retrospect is a wonderful thing for putting meaning on things where there was no meaning, right? So I'll dodge that that mistake. All that happened was the phone rang again. And this time it was some people at a local special school who said, oh, look, we've heard about you. We've heard about the programs that you run in schools. We have people with intellectual and physical disabilities who also exhibit challenging behaviour. Would you be able to help them? And I said, well, actually, yeah, I've studied and worked in that field, and I would love to do that. So I went and started conducting modified versions of those programs at a couple of local special schools. And what that did was it put me in conversation with the teachers, with the young people, with their families, and I went, here we are. Australia hasn't moved anywhere. I now have this successful little not-for-profit organisation built around me, some good people. So let's design. Let me take out of myself what I understand the best possible service might look like, and I'm gonna write that down and put it into a series of policies and procedures and create some forms and stuff like that. So 2002 I did that and applied to Disability Services Queensland to register a post-school service for people with intellectual impairment. And they sent, at the end of the year when I got my application together, they sent a gentleman to have a conversation with me and review my application. And he literally took a pen out of his pocket and was crossing out words like education, training, work, etc. And I said, what are you doing?
This is the person who's in charge of basically funding for disability.
Yeah. He was the senior person. And he said, well, he is a person the second person who sat in my office in 15 years and said, but they've had their education. And what we had next was a very robust conversation that was fairly short and pointed.
Yeah.
Started with words like, you're a disgrace. And we went down from there. So anyway, I put the application in. It got through, they passed it. And we started in 2003 with one of my students, and was, central in some of these things, and myself. And, that's where it started. So 2 of those 3 young people still attend Compass 20, what the heck is it, 20 years later? Yeah, 21 years later.
Yeah.
And so those 3 young people are now 170-something young people, and, 5 sites. And we're under the dojo. So under my little dojo in Palmwoods, there's no running water. The toilets are out the back. Furniture and cutlery and crockery I stole from my home when my wife wasn't looking. Just the most basic, humble origins. But I had a plan. I knew what I was doing. And so delivering proper lessons and assessing those people, providing reports and feedback, structured learning. So, and of course, in no time, away we rolled. Other families they just embrace the dream. What if my son or daughter could actually be more than I have thought? And so often, I remember the end of the first year, I invited the 3 families to come in and chat with me. I said, well, you've seen year 1. What would you like us to do in year 2? And they clearly had a little chat and decided this gentleman, Phil, was going to be the spokesperson. They kind of stepped back and left Phil there, and he said, well, we've talked about it, and what we realised is that we are one of the greatest impediments in the lives of our children. We had some goals for them that were really tenuous, sort of, I wonder if, and you've kicked all of them. They're all gone. So what we wanted to say is, we're in your hands. So you tell us what our children are capable of. And we've gone forward from there.
As in the goals were too low?
Yes. Yeah. They're setting their sights way too low. And their children had surpassed that.
Sure.
Yeah. So, this is the thing. It's not about me. Compass is not about Compass. Compass is a showcase. It's a shop window that allows people to see themselves and people with disabilities in a different way. So that's the primary thing here. It's all about unveiling this potential.
What would you say to people who want to find their potential, and then maybe a bit reluctant to open that jar, that box?
I'd say a couple of things. I'd say, one, life is short. You don't know how long you've got. So don't waste it. Don't waste a second of it. Second thing I think I'd say is look inside. Don't look outside. Nobody else has got the answers to who you are. Listen to yourself. Listen to the little voice inside, and don't judge what it says. Don't go, oh my gosh, when it says that I must be weak, or I must be afraid, or I lack all these things. Don't listen to those bits. Listen to the voice that says, what if? What about that one time where I was in a school concert and I felt awesome about myself, or I won a race when I was 6 at school and I felt amazing. Look for that thing and let that rise up inside yourself. Those tiny little times, and it could have been just where, a time when you weren't afraid and you did something, and relive and reconnect with those things and let them become the center. Realize that's who you are. That's your potential. The rest of the stuff around there isn't you at your best. Don't judge it. Just let it go and focus on the times when you're at your best. Relive those things, feel the energy of them, and then look for the opportunity to be that person in the very next moment you possibly can be.
That's a really good answer. This has been really special, David, and I really appreciate your time. At the end of a conversation, I ask the guests a couple of quick fire questions, which I haven't prepped you for, which I've prepped every single guest before it, but after speaking with you, I thought I don't need to at all prep you at it. The first question is, what would be one tip that you would give somebody who's looking to be more successful in their life?
Ask yourself what success means. How are you going to measure yourself? I want to give you a longer answer to this because I was involved for some years in a thing called the TAFE Work Skills Foundation. There's a trade Olympics every 2 years where people from all walks of life, from hairdressing to bricklaying, go through regional and then state and national competitions. And then they have an international Olympics, the trade Olympics. And so I was a mentor invited into a small group of people who mentored those people in the prep and then post those competitions. I remember a lady and she had been in a couple of previous trade Olympics and she had come second in those competitions. And in the preliminary, I had this conversation with her and she said, I always come second. Okay. Well, I don't care about that. Let's get in touch with you when you're at your best. What do you do? And so, I gave whatever advice I could. She went over, she competed, and we got together some months later for the wrap-up after the competition. And if you can imagine a big room, we're all sitting around this sort of and I'm at one station. And she came around and she was furious. And she said, I'm so effing over this. I came second again. I did everything you said. I did everything here that everybody else said. I worked on myself so damn hard and I still came second. She was outraged. She was really crying out, talking very loudly, yelling, swearing, tears in her eyes. And I was couldn't help myself. I just started smiling more and more and more at her. The more she raved, the more I was smiling. And partway through a rave, I went, "You look amazing. you've lost a lot of weight. She said, yes, of course I lost a lot of weight. I listened, I did that thing with getting my weight down. And blah, blah, blah. I said, are you happy? I've never been happier. I said, you used to be in an abusive relationship, I remember you telling me. How's that going? He said, I've kicked that bastard out. I've made some big changes in my life. And, I've got a man who really loves me now. I've gone, cool. And she's like, but what? And I went, and then the penny dropped. And she's gone, oh, you bastard. What it is, huh? And she's like, yeah. So you're measuring your success by the wrong yardstick. You're measuring it by some stupid competition instead of all the changes that you've made in your life. Yep. You're amazing. You're wonderful. You've done extraordinary things. Bank that. Give yourself a medal.
Love that. I'll double down on that. The next question is, one tip you'd give to somebody looking to be happier in their life?
There's two types of happiness, and I'll get all science on you. It's hedonic happiness, which is moment-to-moment happiness, where we're, throughout the course of the day we fluctuate. Oh, I saw a beautiful butterfly. Oh, it made me feel so happy. And then my neighbour yelled at me over the fence and I was so unhappy. And so people do this all day.
Yep.
The second type of happiness is eudaimonic. And eudaimonic is like a baseline of happiness across the course of our life. So the science, as I understand it around this, is that we're all born on a eudaimonic scale somewhere. And we'll always default to that. And that's very difficult to get away from. You just need to know it about yourself.
Right.
And so I don't have any interest in hedonic happiness, none at all. I'm just even it out. I pay no attention to those things. Eudaimonic happiness is interesting because it's more about, I always say to people, I'm always happy. I'm never satisfied. So it's about making fine distinctions, and I think this is true.
Because there is that paradox
really
there is a paradox between the idea of being happy now with the present and being in the moment, but also being unsatisfied with where you are, which motivates you to achieve and to be your potential. Go searching for your potential, and there are almost paradoxical
that's exactly it.
Concepts.
We're right back at the paradox, which it makes it interesting.
Right, and to your point, do you say I'm happy,
always happy,
but not satisfied? And that's maybe that relationship where it's not necessarily a paradox to be able to be happy with what you have right now and be content.
Goodness, how could we not be? We're alive,
but not satisfied. That drives that forward.
Because there's opportunity.
I like that.
Always opportunity. I watched my teacher in his 80s. This man was the very best in the world at what he did. We always joked, and people who know across the world would joke, there's him, and then 2, 3, 4, and 5, between 1 and 2, there's daylight. There's just, he is a freak. And so I looked at him, this freak, still polishing his technique in his 80s, still reflecting and going, I think I'm improving this little piece, And I would just watch him working on it. And so you go, there you go.
Never satisfied. The next question probably answers that. Is that the most influential person in your life?
I've had the great good fortune to have maybe 3 or 4.
Okay.
I think my grandfather was where I started because something about him, he was a superior person, if I could say that, an extraordinary person in his own self. And then I'm going to say 3 teachers beyond that who have all been extraordinary men. And so I've, what are the odds of being able to have several people in my life who are all just extraordinary. And so, I look at them and I go, my gosh, you're in 70s and 80s and you're doing this. you are this capable. And so that's a benchmark that I'm just like, I'm looking up and going, okay, I'm not getting any younger, but there's still so much room to grow.
That's inspiring. Second last question is your favorite book to read or to gift?
That is a very interesting question. I am a massive learner. I've been devouring books since the day I could hold a torch under the covers when I was a kid. I mean, literally, I was that kid.
Yeah.
One of the early books this may sound a little strange to you, but it was Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
So what I saw in Lord of the Rings was a way of approaching power, and that has stayed with me. So there were two characters in that book that fascinated me. One was Gandalf, who, very central, a wizard, and the other one was a man, much less in the story. His name was Tom Bombadil. So both these people were the only two people who the ring had no power over. So Gandalf, as a matter of will, it had no power over him, and he wanted to rescue the world from the evil. Tom Bombadil thought the ring was a toy, and it had no significance to him whatsoever. And if the world ended, that had no significance, and if a new world started, that had no significance. So I feel like what that book gave me was a perspective. I feel like I want to be a combination of those two, and I want to be able to play effortlessly in the world and not let things have power over me. And at the same time, there's a piece of me that wants to be Gandalf, wants to know I have to do my best to also help other people. And so I'm torn between those two.
The paradox again.
Yeah, really is. That book, for that reason, because there's something about that gave me perspective on my life and my activity. And I read everything that has to do with human potential. I commented before about the Stephen Kotler. I love reading about other people who do extraordinary things that you would look at and go, oh, that's impossible.
Yeah.
Because it reinforces to me potential.
For sure.
And it keeps my eyes up. It's all too easy to either look in or look down.
Yeah.
So I want to be looking up.
I like that. And finally, a guest, famous or otherwise, that you think we should interview.
Teacher was alive, I'd say put him in front of you. Mind you, he'd be wanting to swing a sword and show you how all that bit worked. There's another martial arts teacher who's still alive. His name's Shimazu Sensei. I won't give you the long story about how I met him. I asked him a question once. I had an opportunity. You don't have opportunities to ask people like this question. But I had fallen into a space and this one opportunity where I could just ask this one man one question. And I said, Sensei, what advice would you give me? And he'd known me for a day, but he knew my teacher very well. He knew my history. And his advice was cut straight. He'd be a man worth talking to. Yeah. That will be a difficult interview to arrange. But that one little beautiful gem has stuck with me. Really went in like an arrow.
Cut straight. David Dangerfield, this has been an absolute pleasure. And I am very privileged and thankful for you to come here and share your stories and hopefully help others, inspire others to find their potential.
Pleasure.
That was David Dangerfield, an incredible human and someone who has so many experiences and ideas around potential and life in general. And that was just such an amazing opportunity and something that I'll remember for a very, very long time. I hope you all got something out of that. And if you did, please share it with people that you think will enjoy it. And if you did like the episode, please,
feel free to follow on whatever podcasting app you use.
If you did like this episode and any of the episodes that we do here, please follow and subscribe to wherever you get the podcast from. It really means a lot to us. So until next time, peace.